Hello, welcome to the True Paranormal. Today we're going to be discussing the Fox sisters. That's the last Friday article that I did. I know the last live stream I read out the Jamaica Inn article. That was a location. Usually I won't be reading out the location articles. Usually it'll be the article I do each Friday, which will be about, and I was thinking about this earlier, it'll be either about what I'm deeming a paranormal influencer, so someone such as the Fox sisters who had a lot of involvement in the paranormal. Just kind of turn that a little bit. There you go. Who had a lot of involvement and influenced the paranormal, or it'll be about haunted objects, or just artifacts in general, or it'll be about this is where I'm trying to remember what I was actually thinking about earlier on in terms of what the Friday articles were going to be. People's experiences is going to be one. Possible journal entries, possible word lists, and there was a sixth one as well, but that will be what I'll be reading out on the Wednesday live streams. Although if ever the Friday article was a word list analysis, it will be spirit types. That was the sixth one. If it is a word list analysis, I won't read that out because that's a lot of figures and numbers. So it will then be the location that I read out. But for the most part, it's going to be something beside a haunted location. So today it is the Fox sisters that I'm reading out. And yeah, a big thank you to anyone who's read the Fox sisters article, as it has gained a lot of views, kind of quite an unexpectedly high amount, although in a way I probably should have expected it, given the Fox sisters are well known. Although I didn't hear about them until I believe it was Beardo was discussing them, and that's or he'd mentioned them, and that's kind of how I came to know about them. Also, apologies if I do seem like a little bit out of it. I am really tired tonight. It's been a busy few days of trying to do a lot of article writing. So yeah, if I seem a bit out of it, that'll be why. So the Fox sisters. The Fox sisters are thought of as the founders of the spiritualist movement. The three sisters, Maggie, Kate, and Leah, or Leah, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. It's Leah. So Leah, I'm not too sure. Went on to achieve fame for their ability to communicate with spirits. This fame of communication, along with the mythology they created around their home, is what led to people adopting spiritualism as their belief. One of the most famous spiritualists was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Eventually, Maggie Fox confessed to the world that the sisters were frauds, and that the knocking which could be heard in seances came from the sisters cracking the joints in their toes. Regardless of this confession, the spiritualist movement continued, with many people going on to profit from being psychic mediums. So this is very much so kind of the dawn of what I would deem as the modern paranormal. So when you go on YouTube, when you watch TV, and you've got people claiming to be psychic mediums, people claiming to hear knocking, it all stems from the Fox sisters. That kind of thing. The paranormal was discussed and it was known before then. However, it wasn't mainstream, as it were. It was very much so kind of a taboo topic where, I mean, in the article in a bit, I'll read out that a couple of 100 years earlier, the girls would have been kind of burnt as witches and accused of witchcraft because of claiming to communicate with spirits. It was never a particularly glorified topic before the Fox sisters. So the history of the Fox sisters. The initial event which started it all occurred during the March of 1848. The Fox family had moved into a tiny one-bedroom cottage in the hamlet of Hydesville, New York, during the December of 1947. The family who had moved in consisted of Margaretta Fox, Catherine Fox, and their parents, Margaret and Jane Fox. Margaretta and Catherine are better known as Maggie and Kate. Other family members, although not living with the family, were Leah and David, who were both siblings of Maggie and Kate. Yeah, I'm not sure if it is Leah or Leah. It's awkward. So if I do alternate with how I'm pronouncing that name, it's because I don't have a clue which one it is. The family rented the Hydesville house while they were building a new house in order to be closer to David, and they were possibly the third family to have rented this property. It's also important to mention now that I have looked through a number of sources to do with the information here, so I would like to think that everything I've written is correct. However, I do not claim that all of this is 100% accurate. I've looked through a number of sources which will kind of corroborate facts, etc., but that doesn't make them correct. They could have just done what I've done and just looked at other sources, and it's all possibly just stemmed from one source. So do not treat this information as 100% accurate. It's probably roughly accurate. Anything inconsistent I do tend to highlight in the articles, but in the case of this so far, so good. There are a few variations of the exact events which occurred during the family's stay within the Hydesville house. An extremely simplified version is that during the March of 1848, the family heard knocking occur within their house and attributed it to a spirit of some sort. The word of the supposed spirit communication then spread to neighbours and to both Leah and David. The reason why I've stated this simplified version of events first is because it seems no one knows for sure as to what exactly happened during this time, aside the details I've started with. A good example of how the story has fallen into the realm of myth and legend is that it doesn't even seem that anyone knows how old Maggie and Kate were at the time. Sources say at the time of the 1848 disturbances, Maggie was older than Kate, and some say they were aged 14 and 11. Others say 15 and 12, more say 8 and 5, and a few say 12 and 9. From what I've found, the ages of 8 and 9 come from Maggie's confession. The ages of 12 and 9 come from what Robert Dale Owen was told by the family during 1860, and the ages of 12 and 15 come from a statement the mother signed on the 11th of April 1848. It's important as well to say, when I've reeled off those ages, and I've said like more say 8 and 5, a few say 12 and 9, that's not a reflection on the quantity of sources. That's more just me trying to reel off this list without it sounding repetitive and just like a bombardment of numbers, which is slightly jarring with the way I've written it, but it's just important to say it's not an accurate reflection on how many or how few sources. It's just saying some sources have said this, some sources have said that, but where the ages have come from, as far as I'm aware, is accurate, but that's as far as I'm aware. I could be wrong. The tombstone dates for Maggie and Kate give their dates of birth as the 7th of October 1833 for Maggie and the 27th of March 1837 for Kate. This means that the ages of 14 and 11 could be accurate for the 1848 events. This almost lines up with the mother's statement, which was given close to the time of the events. I suspect the younger ages provided in order to try and gain sympathy from the general public during Maggie's confession, but I'll discuss that more later in the article. I found that their older sister Leah was born during 1813. As for what specifically happened during the March of 1848, the Fox sisters' mother described it as follows. On Friday night, the 31st of March, it was heard as usual. It was very early when we went to bed on this night, hardly dark. We went to bed so early because we had been broken so much of our rest that I was almost sick. My husband had not gone to bed when we first heard the noise on this evening. I had just laid down, and it commenced as usual. I knew it from all other noises I had ever heard in the house. The girls who slept in the other bed in the room heard the noise and tried to make a similar noise by snapping their fingers. The youngest girl is about 12 years old. She is the one who made her hand go, and as fast as she made the noise with her hands or fingers, the sound was followed up in the room. It did not sound any different at that time, only it made the same number of noises that the girl did. When she stopped, the sound itself stopped for a short time. The other girl, who was in her 15th year, then spoke in sport and said, "Now do this just as I do. Count 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., striking one hand and the other at the same time, but she made no sound, and they heard an immediate 4 raps, to which she responded, 'Oh, mother, look, they can see as well as hear.' And then I spoke and said to the noise, 'Count 10, and it made 10 strokes or noises. Then I asked the ages of my different children successively, and it gave a number of raps corresponding to the ages of my children. It's also important to note there regarding the ages that the something I hadn't written down because I don't know how truthful it is. It could just be speculatory. It's a small detail, but the ages on the tombstones apparently come from a friend of the sisters, as far as I can remember, which apparently they confided their birth dates to the friend, and the friend then put them on the tombstones. It is possible the friend could have misremembered the birth dates. It is possible that the sisters were not being truthful with the birth dates to the friend. It's possible that it's just all made up. So this is why I haven't included that small piece of information. There are a few things in this article where I probably should edit at a future point to include. I was a little bit pushed for time, admittedly, while writing it. One of the things I should probably include is the full confession at the end of the article, because at the moment I've just got it kind of in snippets. And the Science Encyclopedia, which is listed as a source in the sources I've used, but at the end, that does list the full confession. As far as I'm aware, anyway, it's for the full confession. So I may very well edit this in the future to include that confession. But at the moment, this is how the article stands. It is said that the family had been plagued all month by loud thuds occurring in the house. It's also been said by sources that the sounds followed Maggie and Kate, and that on this particular evening the noises started after the girls had been sent to bed. The noises have also been described as louder than before, and it seemed like they were occurring all over the house. As a result, the mother was convinced something demonic was happening, and so sent her husband to get help from the neighbours. It's important to remember that any information not included in any quotes is best taken lightly, as it could just be filler included by sources to make for a more interesting and entertaining read. This could be a reason why the story has slight variations among sources. So, for instance, with this particular version saying something demonic was happening, at the moment, demon, demonic, it's all very much so buzzword to get people interested in content. So when a source has said, oh, something demonic happened, that might not have been the impression at the time. They may have just thought it was a spirit. They may not have thought demon, but because demon is a buzzword, the article could have implemented that and kind of twisted the words a little. So yeah, that's an important thing for me to have mentioned here. It said the Fox sisters' bedroom was crowded with people in candlelight witnessing the noises for themselves. William Dewsler, a neighbour, asked questions to the spirits and termed the responding knocks as raps. Slowly they found out that the spirits, who the sisters had originally called Mr. Splitfoot, was a 31-year-old peddler who had been murdered for $500 and then buried beneath the house by a previous tenant. At the time, no one knew who the peddler could be, although the Fox's eldest son, David, suggested running through the alphabet to find out the name, and no name was given. A slight variation to this is that a name was given and that the spirit was found to be called Charles B. Rosner. Alternations of Rosner to be cited are Rosa and Rosmer. After this event, the locals began to remember a young peddler then passed through a few years earlier, but they couldn't say exactly when. Other locals also said that David had dug beneath the house one summer and discovered bones and a set of human teeth. These tales and half-remembered details are likely why the telling of the original event from the 31st of March 1848 is retold in a few different ways. So it's very much so, you've got not only modern articles possibly putting a little bit of a not quite truthful spin on it, but it's been so warped and misremembered by anyone who was around at the time and who've passed on the story. One thing I will mention as well, which seems to me like a bit of an inconsistency, is the timescale between the initial events. So you've got some people saying that the initial event happened and that neighbours, it seems like neighbours went round on that night. It also seems like David was over on that night. It then seemed like Leia was over on that night, depending on some of the variations of the story. So I don't know the time frame between all of this. That's one thing that was not clear amongst any sources. The exact timescale between when the Foxes initially heard the knocking in their house, when neighbours became involved, because it does seem like neighbours did become involved, when David became involved, when Leia became involved, because as far as I'm aware, David lived elsewhere. He wasn't at this house. And it's not like they had phones, so they couldn't just text him being like, oh, you got to get over here immediately, crazy stuff's going on. which is why I think it's a little bit inconsistent. Just bearing that in mind. It is possible, maybe David was there at the time anyway, naturally, and because they were there to be closer to David, but I don't know for sure. There are a few things where you can kind of prod a little at the story, and you can probably get indications as to where it's shifted, warped, evolved over time. So yeah, just thought important to mention that. For instance, the inconsistent details are that Maggie and Kate claimed the spirit was communicating through the raps, and after the mother asked how the spirit... I'm going to start that again. I misspelled, instead of putting communicated, I put communication. For instance, and this is where I need to try and think, have I put consistent instead of inconsistent? Okay. For instance, the consistent details are that Maggie and Kate claimed a spirit was communicating through the raps, and after the mother asked the spirit how many children she had, the correct number of raps was given. It's also said that a neighbour witnessed the sounds. The Smithsonian magazine recounts the events as saying they told a neighbour about the raps, and so the neighbour went to see them. The mother asked questions such as asking to count to 5, then 15. She also asked for 3 raps if the spirit was injured, which it did, and asked the neighbour's age, to which the spirit accurately replied with 33 raps. The Smithsonian magazine also points out that this event all happened on the 31st of March, which is the eve of April Fool's Day, plus that residents examined the cellar of the home and found hair and bone fragments. So yeah, so I don't think I misspelled. I don't think I put consistent instead of inconsistent. I think that's all just consistent details. It's just, instead of putting communicating, I've put communication. See, this is the only thing with that, reading out the actual article, I properly notice all of the, any spelling mistakes, as it were. Anyway, the community leaders, Isaac and Amy Post, were intrigued by the story being spun by the Fox sisters, along with the rumour about the peddler. They invited the girls to their home to see if they could communicate with the spirits in another location. Isaac Post wrote the following: I suppose I went with as much unbelief as Thomas felt when he was introduced to Jesus after he had ascended. He also said he was swayed by very distinct thumps under the floor and several apparent answers. It said that in a few weeks the story of the Hydesville haunting had made its way across the state. Leah Fox Fish, who is sometimes referred to just as Leah Fish, was a music teacher in nearby Rochester, and it said she first heard about the haunting when a pupil read out a newspaper article documenting it. It's also said that by the time she returned home, the Fox family had all moved to David's house in a neighbouring village to escape from the crowds of locals who had hoped to meet the girls they heard could communicate with the dead. Apparently, Leah quickly discovered that the noises were being created by Maggie and Kate, and the sisters admitted it to her, revealing that they created the noises by cracking their toes with no visible movement to others. When the sisters did this in contact with wooden surfaces to amplify the noise, the sounds seemed like they were coming from spirits and not the girls' feet. However, instead of telling the truth about the sounds, Leah decided to turn this into a little bit of a business, as said by Nancy Robinson Stewart, the author of The Reluctant Spiritualist, The Life of Maggie Fox. So you see what I mean there, in terms of, I don't know the timescale, because it said that by the time Leah got home from teaching, the family had moved into David's house, which is a neighbouring village, so I'm assuming it would take maybe at most an hour for them to walk there. And you've already got loads of people in the neighbourhood having heard about it and turning up at the house. So I don't know the timescale, because to me that kind of news wouldn't get out that fast in that time period. This is the 1800s. It's not now. It's not social media world. It's very much so everything's relying on word of mouth. So as far as I'm aware at least, so I don't quite know how long after it was that Leah became involved. But regardless, Leah moved herself, Maggie and Kate into a house in Rochester where for $1 each people could attend a seance with them. Isaac Post was also convinced when Leah claimed to be a medium and communicated with Post's recently deceased daughter. The Post then rented Rochester's Corinthian Hall for the sisters to perform in. The Fox sisters quickly became popular as psychic mediums and their fame spread. This was all made possible due to the context of the time period. During the spring and summer of 1848, revolutions were happening across Western Europe, the Mexican-American War came to an end, and the gold rush was underway in California. Things were slower in rural New York, and so this is why word quickly spread through the state. The popularity of the Fox sisters marked a shift in popular attitudes towards the paranormal, as 200 years earlier the sisters would have been burned as witches for such claims of spirit communication, but instead they found themselves to be celebrities. Most people who saw them thought they were real, but there were still skeptics. Maggie in particular was subject to abuse from those who thought she was either a fraud or a heretic. In Troy, New York, Maggie was a victim of a kidnapping attempt by a group of men who were seemingly offended by the sisters' show. It became too much for Maggie and Kate, as they were still only children, and what had started as a joke to relieve boredom had all spun out of control. The sisters performed to full theatres, but their first public show was on the 14th of November 1849, when they performed in Rochester's Corinthian Hall, and demonstrated their abilities to a crowd of nearly 400 people. This was the performance booked by Isaac Post, and after this performance, Amy Post accompanied the sisters to a private chamber where their robes were removed, and they were examined by a committee of skeptics who found no evidence of a hoax. However, apparently some people did correctly guess that the sisters were cracking their joints. Apparently, during the November of 1849, because it was getting too much for the girls, they tried ending the shows by spelling out, "We will now bid you farewell" with the raps during the seance. For 2 weeks, the spirits seemingly remained silent, but Leia decided to keep the show going with her sisters. I'm unsure if this message was spelled out during their first public demonstration in the Corinthian Hall or if it was later. Because both events happened in November, so I don't know if they went to numerous shows and decided, right, we've had enough of the shows, or if it was their very first one where they were like, no, this is too much, it's gone too far, we're performing in front of everyone, and if they freaked out a little bit. By 1850, rapping had become a nationwide craze, and spiritualism had been born. The movement separated itself from previous spiritual and religious beliefs due to its connection to the growing media and the entertainment industries in both the US and Europe. People in the work of spiritualism were paid to give theatrical performances, and so they used elaborate lighting, music, and table-tipping seances to fool their audience. During the 1850s, Ira and William Davenport became famous for a magic show which featured tricks they claimed were due to spiritual intervention. Magicians such as Harry Houdini differentiated themselves from spiritualism by exposing the spiritualist as a hoax. This trend continues today, with a good modern example of a debunking magician being the late James Randi. However, despite people's attempts to debunk the hoaxes, spiritualism remained popular. An important thing to mention there with Harry Houdini is he actually started not by debunking spiritualism, but he was involved in it. He did do fake seances himself in his early career, which is quite often the way, I feel. Like, people first, they learn about the tricks, they learn about how to do the tricks, they perform the tricks themselves, and then at some point they reach some sort of moral judgment where they're like, yeah, this isn't good. In Harry Houdini's context, it was after the death of his mum, where he then took offence to anyone claiming to be able to communicate with her after she died. A brilliant example of that, Arthur Conan Doyle was at one point friends with Harry Houdini, and Conan Doyle and Conan Doyle's wife, who claimed to be a medium, sat down with Houdini saying, look, sorry about your mum, we can deliver a message to you from her. And Houdini was quite frankly offended by the performance and never spoke to Doyle again, from the sounds of things and from what I can remember from having researched that article. But yeah, in the terms of James Randi, I don't think he started off as, faking things himself. I think he straight away took offence to it. But I could be wrong there. I'm not sure. Anyway, it can be argued that the spiritualism movement began before the Fox sisters, and that they were just a stage in the movement's development. Andrew Jackson Davis, an American seer from the 1800s, became known as the John the Baptist of modern spiritualism. He used the ideologies of the 1700s Australian healer Franz Anton Mesmer and the 1700s Swedish philosopher and mystic Emanuel Swedenborg to predict the rise of spiritualism. Davis believed that his prediction arose a year later, when word had spread about the Hyattsville haunting. When Davis heard about this incident, he invited the sisters to his home in New York City to witness their abilities himself. This elevated his own status from being an obscure prophet into being a recognized leader of a mass movement. During the October of 1850, the New Haven Journal reported that there were 40 families in upstate New York who claimed to have the same gifts as the Fox sisters, and that there were hundreds more from Virginia to Ohio. During 1851, a writer at Spiritual World tallied more than 100 spirit mediums in New York City alone. The spiritualism movement didn't emerge as a shadowy occult practice or as a roadside attraction. Instead, it was viewed as an exciting way of reconciling the mysteries of the soul with the complicated realities of a modern, rapidly industrializing nation. It was respectable, and proponents included Thomas Edison, the anti-slavery leader William Lloyd Garrison, and many prominent women's rights advocates based in Rochester. Along with the names mentioned, there were a conspicuous number of new adherents from scientific backgrounds. A physician from New England, Dr. Phelps, reported that his windows had spontaneously shattered, his clothes had torn, inanimate objects had danced together on his floor, and turnips inscribed with mysterious hieroglyphs had surged forth from his living room carpet. As science challenged the old ways, spiritualism offered a way of clinging to the past. Spiritualists believed they were cutting edge with their ideas and that they were using scientific methods to prove the existence of God in the afterlife. Science was rapidly changing the world with such things as Darwinism, the railroads, the telegraph, mass production, and mass immigration. People refused to believe that spiritualism was more outlandish than what science was doing. For instance, the telegraph seemed to magically allow communication to occur across oceans, and the rapping from spirit communication didn't sound too dissimilar from the noise of a telegraph. An interesting point with that paragraph, because if you look at modern day paranormal investigation, a lot of teams kind of hide behind gadgets and technology, and they hide behind claims of being scientific, when really, when you look at it, they might not be scientific at all. They might just be claiming to be. So it's a lot of interesting parallels between then and now still. Maggie, Kate, and Leah all went on a professional tour to spread word about spirits, during which they booked a suite at Barnum's Hotel on the corner of Broadway and Maiden Lane. At this time, an editorial in the Scientific American referred to the sisters as the spiritual knockers from Rochester. The Fox sisters conducted sessions in the hotel's parlour and invited as many as 30 attendees to gather around a large table at 10 a.m., 5 p.m., and 8 p.m. These attendees included members of New York society, such as the influential editor of the New York Tribune, James Fenimore Cooper, the editor and poet, William Cullen Bryant, the abolitionist, William Lloyd Garrison, and Horace Greeley. It said they witnessed spirits rap in time to popular songs, and that these spirits spelled out spiritualism will work miracles in the cause of reform. Leah stayed in New York and entertained callers in a seance room. However, Maggie and Kate took their show to other cities such as Cleveland, Cincinnati, Columbus, St. Louis, Washington, D.C., and Philadelphia. It was during 1852 in Philadelphia that Maggie came to meet the famous Arctic explorer Elisha Kent Kane. Kane deemed Maggie as a fraud, although couldn't prove how the sounds were happening. He wasn't the only one who thought this, and there was ample evidence of the sisters being frauds in their first 4 years. Some people pointed out the frequency that famous figures such as Benjamin Franklin would appear at seances. One man even noticed that Franklin's spelling and grammar had diminished terribly since the man's death. There were also times that Franklin wouldn't turn up at all. This was accompanied by the excuse of the conditions not being to the spirit's liking. During a performance in Buffalo, cushions were placed between the girl's feet and the wooden floorboards. Leia then claimed the negative energy of cynics polluted the channel between the girls and the spirits. She also claimed that only those of pure heart who believed without question would be able to witness definitive proof of the girls' powers. This excuse worked well for the girls at the time, and it's the kind of excuse which is often provided by psychics and certain investigative teams today, which it is. I remember watching James Randi debunking some psychics and various people who claim various powers, and I remember one in particular who claimed that he could flip the pages of a book at a distance with his mind, and he couldn't, and it was proof that he couldn't, because Randy, the way he did it, and to show that he couldn't do it, is Randy placed some styrofoam around the book, and so I don't think he placed any on the pages, but he placed them in front of the pages and around the book, and he said, right, if you are using the powers of your mind, you should be able to lift the pages independently from moving the styrofoam. And if you are not using your mind, and if you are subtly blowing with your breath to tip the pages over, then we will see the styrofoam move with the pages. And so this guy kind of stood there for ages, and this is all, I believe, live TV. It's definitely TV, but he was there kind of putting his hand on his head and like staring at it and doing all the things, all the gimmicks. And after ages, he was like, no, I can't do it, the conditions aren't right, the lights are too warm, and it's cutting off the thing, and you don't believe in it, so it's polluting the channels, as it were. He was saying very similar excuses to what Leia kind of said in the face of critics here, which it just shows that the same excuses are always given, because there's only so many excuses, I suppose, that you can make up. And yeah, and this is why anyone who claims to have any sort of psychic ability to communicate with spirits, they should be willing to test that under any condition, even if it's just for their own learning. Because certain things, for instance, if you put someone in a Faraday cage, right, where there's no signals in and out, and it said, right, now communicate with the spirits. If you have no spirit communication in that kind of room, it doesn't mean that the spirits don't exist and that you can't communicate with them. It just means you can't do it under those conditions. That's one thing that I think of. When it comes to that test, it very clearly showed good logic to say, styrofoam, it shouldn't move if your ability works as you say it does. So it's a very interesting point there. Anyway, continuing on. Eventually, Maggie ended up in a romance with Kane. Apparently, she was 13 years younger than Kane, and at the time of their meeting in 1852, she was 17 years old. Kane encouraged Maggie to give up her life of dreary sameness and suspected deceit. Oh, wait. Sorry for that. I am very tired tonight. And so Maggie retired to attend school at Kane's expense. Kane promised Maggie that they would one day be married. However, Kane's family viewed Maggie as a backwoods purveyor of profane heresy. As Kane was fearful of the consequences of a proper marriage, he compromised with a ring-exchanging ceremony, with the promise of a full wedding recognized by God and law upon his return from his latest expedition. The legal wedding never occurred, and the ring-exchanging ceremony happened shortly before his death in 1857. Kane's death occurred at the age of 36 after he fell ill in Cuba. Kane's parents forbid Maggie from attending his funeral and refused to acknowledge her as their son's betrothed and common-law wife. They also rejected her claim to a share of his estate. Maggie retaliated by publishing The Love Life of Dr. Kane, a book consisting of his letters to her. To honour Kane's memory, Maggie converted to Catholicism, as he had always encouraged her to do this. However, distraught by Kane's death, Maggie began drinking heavily. She also vowed to keep her promise to Kane to wholly and forever abandon spiritualism. Also during 1857, presumably before Kane's death occurred, the Boston Courier offered a $500 prize to any medium who could demonstrate genuine paranormal abilities in front of a committee of Harvard professors. The sisters attempted this challenge, but they failed as the professors concluded that the raps came from the sisters cracking their joints. After the sisters' US tour, Kate pursued an education in England. This was sponsored by the wealthy benefactor Horace Greeley, who had seen the sisters perform at Barnum's Hotel. With Kate's move to England came the spread of spiritualism to Great Britain. While in England, she staged shows where the ghosts appeared in physical form. It's still unclear how she did this, but the apparitions were said to appear in a strange psychic light during her seances. Kate also developed her medium powers by communicating two messages at the same time, one being written while the other was spoken. An interesting point about the $500 prize is James Randi offered something very, very similar. And a number of people went to try and claim the prize, and they all failed. So yeah, it's always interesting whenever there's any talk about anyone claiming psychic abilities who's potentially getting fame from it at the time as well, if they don't pick up that kind of prize, because you'd think that they would if they could. So, but perhaps people with these genuine abilities, maybe they aren't fussed about money. Maybe they don't want fame and money and all of that. As kind of shown by the Fox sisters, really. They didn't want any of the fame, and it did kind of ruin their lives a bit. The 1860s were a prominent time for spiritualism's rise. The American Civil War began on the 12th of April, 1861, and Prince Albert died on the 14th of December, 1861. People found comfort in the idea that they could still communicate with those they had lost. This led to Queen Victoria holding many seances in Buckingham Palace to communicate with Prince Albert, and the First Lady, Mary Todd Lincoln, held seances in the White House to communicate with her and Abraham Lincoln's dead children. Kate's business boomed during this era, and the prominent spiritualist Emma Hardinge wrote that the American Civil War added 2 million new believers to the movement. During the 1870s, a leading physicist called William Crookes tested Kate and concluded she was believable. However, others called Crookes gullible for his assessment. During 1872, Kate married the London-based barrister Henry D. Jenkin. Jenkin was also a devout spiritualist, and the couple had 2 children together. After marriage, Kate used the name Fox Jenkin. Henry later died during 1881, leaving Kate as a widow with 2 children. Kate went back to mediumship to support herself, but like Maggie, she also gained a drinking problem. Kate returned to the US during 1885, and 3 years later her children were taken from her due to alcoholism. Another reason cited for Kate's drinking problem is that miracles were expected from her during every seance, and that pressure was too much on her. Another one which I haven't included in this article as well, which I'm unsure of if it is the reason, is apparently her parents had died, and it was the deaths of her parents which also caused the drinking problem. But I think it's probably, with drinking problems, I feel like it's not one thing that drives someone to it. I think it's probably a number of factors. So I think the pressure from the seances, I think the death of her husband, I think the death of parents as well, probably all contribute to the drinking. At the very least, they're going to make the drinking worse if she'd already had a problem. As for Leia, she gained wealth, social clout, and opportunities which would have never been offered to someone of her background. In the field of mediumship, women dominated. Leia used to be a single mother hampered by the social restrictions of being a woman at the time, but over the next decade she became a venerable society lady and the wife of a Wall Street banker. As spiritualism had become so mainstream, Leia didn't feel she needed to distance herself from it. By the 1880s, there were an estimated 8 million spiritualists in the US and Europe. It was during the year of 1888, 40 years after the initial event at the Hydesville house, that Maggie made a public confession. During this year, there were millions of confirmed spiritualists across the planet, including Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who published his first Sherlock Holmes book in the same year. Maggie's confession occurred on the 21st of October 1888 at the New York Academy of Music, and it featured a full demonstration of how the tricks had been performed. Kate sat in the audience and confirmed everything while Leah dismissed her sisters as attention seekers. On the same day, New York World published an interview with Maggie in anticipation of her appearance at the Academy. She was paid $1,500 for exclusive, and this fact has been cited by spiritualists who claim Maggie only confessed for profit, and so they believe the confession to be a lie. They also believe Maggie sought to profit out of becoming one of spiritualism's fiercest critics. Maggie's confession letter to New York World reads as follows. Mrs. Underhill, my eldest sister, took Katie and me to Rochester. There it was that we discovered a new way to make the raps. My sister Katie was the first to observe that by swishing her fingers, she could produce certain noises with her knuckles and joints and that the same effect could be made with the toes. Finding that we could make raps with our feet, first with one foot and then with both, we practiced until we could do this easily when the room was dark. Like most perplexing things, when made clear, it is astonishing how easily it is done. The rapping are simply the result of a perfect control of the muscles of the leg below the knee, which govern the tendons of the foot and allow action of the toe and ankle bone that is not commonly known. Such perfect control is only possible when the child is taken at an early age and carefully and continually taught to practice the muscles, which grow stiffer in later years. This, then, is the simplest explanation of the whole method of the knocks and raps. A great many people, when they hear the rapping, imagine at once that the spirits are touching them. It is a very common delusion. Some very wealthy people came to see me some years ago when I lived in 42nd Street, and I did some rappings for them. I made the spirit rap on the chair, and one of the ladies cried out, I feel the spirit tapping me on the shoulder. Of course, this was pure imagination. As for Maggie's motivation for denouncing spiritualism, it's believed that she held rage towards Leah and other spiritualists who publicly chastised Katie for her drinking and accused her of being unable to care for her two young children. The mainstream press referred to Maggie's confession as a death blow to the movement. The confession reads as follows. My sister Katie and myself were very young children when this horrible deception began. At night, when we went to bed, we used to tie an apple on a string and move the string up and down, causing the apple to bump on the floor, or we would drop the apple on the floor, making a strange noise every time it would rebound. According to the New York Herald, it was reported that Maggie's confession was greeted with cheers and hisses. The Herald also reported that Maggie said, when I began this deception, I was too young to know right from wrong. That I have been mainly instrumental in perpetuating the fraud of spiritualism upon a too confiding public, many of you already know. It is the greatest sorrow of my life. Maggie later recanted her confession during 1889, only a year later, apparently saying her spirit guides told her to do so. In reality, this is possibly because of realization that it would deprive her of her only source of income. However, apparently, she later went under the pseudonym Mrs. Spencer and revealed several tricks of the profession. Maggie never reconciled with Leah, and Leah died of carditis on the 1st of November 1890. Kate died while on a drinking spree on the 2nd of July 1892. Maggie died on the 8th of March 1893 of heart trouble. I have found information saying Maggie died during 1895, but it seems 1893 is correct. All three sisters are buried in Brooklyn, New York. Apparently, Maggie died a bitter and broken woman who was relying on the kindness of friends and acquaintances to keep a roof over her head. She was an accidental pioneer, yet her death made little impact on the spiritualist community. There was no memorial saints like there was with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and no spirit medium received a message from the other side. During 1893, spiritualists formed the National Spiritualist Association, now called the National Spiritualist Association of Churches. I have found that the original house of the Hydesville haunting burned down during 1903. This seems partially incorrect, namely regarding the year. It seems the house was still standing during 1904, and apparently by this year it had become known locally as the Spook House. School children are said to have discovered the majority of the skeleton between the earth and crumbling walls. A doctor was consulted, and he estimated the bones to be roughly 50 years old. This appeared to give credibility to the sisters' tale of messages from a murdered peddler, but not everyone was convinced by this. There were suggestions that the sisters were smart enough to exploit a local mystery, and the Times concluded the confession about cracking joints reduced the whole case to a farce. Another doctor examined the skeleton 5 years later and determined it was made up of a few ribs and bits of bones, of which there were too many of some and too few of others. He also determined that there were some chicken bones included in the mix. As a result, there is a rumour that a local man planted the bones as a joke. The house was moved to Lilydale during 1916, and it stayed there until it burned down on the 21st of September 1955. The foundations of the house still remain in Hydesville, and a man called John Drummond moved there and built a replica house. Hydesville Day is an important day for spiritualists, which is celebrated on 31st of March to remember the initial event that seems to have started a whole spiritualism movement. My thoughts. Researching the Fox sisters had me wondering something I've been increasingly debating since writing these articles. It seems undeniable that the Fox sisters were frauds, and they either started or spurred on a whole belief in spirit communication, which otherwise may not have gained traction without the part they played. Their popularity seems like a very right place, right time situation. The spiritualism movement is undeniably what has led to modern day interpretations of the paranormal, with increased horror media which began during the 1970s and the satanic panic of the 1980s. This leads me on to what I personally view as the start of modern paranormal investigation for the UK, Most Haunted. For Americans, it would likely be Ed and Lorraine Warren or Ghost Adventures. The reason I say the start of modern paranormal investigation for the UK is Most Haunted is because many team members, including myself, say they grew up on that programme and they wanted to achieve the same results. The Most Haunted team inspired a generation of paranormal investigators, and these investigators are often inclined to use the same methods as the Most Haunted team. However, the Most Haunted team are dubious to say the least, just like the Fox sisters. The relevance of this is I often debate if the belief in spirits has all originated from a lie, and if so, then does that mean spirits do not exist? You can imagine the paranormal is a tower. The earth is the Fox sisters, the foundations are the Warrens or Most Haunted, and the tower itself is modern paranormal investigation. If you remove the earth and the foundation, then surely the tower falls. This is the debate I find myself having when looking into the paranormal influences of the past. It seems like there is minimal cause for the truth and validity in spirit communication and spirit existence. At least this is true when you look into the history of the modern day belief. Regarding why I believe the paranormal can still exist, I think that lies in people's experiences. People can know nothing about details of the paranormal or its history, yet they still have the same experience within a location they know nothing about and have never visited before as someone else. This indicates to me that there is some truth in modern paranormal experiences, regardless of what the history of paranormal influences may indicate. To me, people such as the Fox sisters don't indicate that spirits do not exist. Instead, they indicate to me that our approach towards the paranormal and the existence of spirits is likely heavily incorrect. As a result, I feel it's important for us to look more into paranormal experiences and to theorise around them. It's important to cross-analyse these too in order to find the common details amongst stories, and the more outlandish ones which are likely made up for dramatic effect. I feel it's only through doing this that the paranormal field can progress, and we can accurately determine how spirits behave and how they can communicate with us, if at all. And that is the end of that article. So I absolutely agree with what I put as my thoughts at the end there, that when it comes to frauds, fakes, hoaxes, however you want to refer to it, a lot of people immediately react with rage. And rage, outrage, anger, disbelief, that kind of thing. They react in a negative way. I react more so with intrigue and disappointment, I think is the best way to approach it if someone's faking. Intrigue as to the motivations for why faking things, how it came about, learning more about the people and how they've done it, why they've done it. All of that stuff is where the intrigue comes from. The disappointment is then the part which is, come on, you know that this is a muddied topic, a muddied branch of research, etc. And why are you adding more mud to the muddy pile, you know? That's where the disappointment comes into it. I don't react with outrage or anger or anything like that, because I know people have reasons. For instance, with the Fox sisters, they confessed, they very much so said that it spiraled out of control. They didn't expect it to be as big as it was, etc. And I think that's quite often the case. I know there's someone on YouTube, I can't remember his YouTube channel, I can't remember the podcast type format he currently does, but he has done a thing recently. I mean, I know that Beardo, I want to say went to war with him, but called him out a number of times regarding fakery. When, it was the Channelanian Ben, that's what it was. And yeah, they were fake. And the Ben has done a video saying, yes, we were fake. I thought that was quite obvious, and he addressed it. He addressed the history of it in that video as to why they kept faking. And he said there was a lot of pressure on them from a company they got involved in and signed contracts with, etc. And the company demanded certain things from them, one of which was kind of to continue faking. So that's where again, intrigue. All of these things that you will not know, do not know. So it's like if Most Haunted suddenly came out and said, look, we faked everything. Every single bit of evidence you've ever seen in our program is fake. I wouldn't blame them, because they work for TV companies, etc. They need viewers. They need viewing numbers to stay on TV. And so I don't blame them for faking. I see why people do it. I wouldn't do it myself. Like I said, I think it muddies a muddy movement, but or not movement as such, research topic. But that's where the debate comes into it, because then you look at these teams and all of the fakery that has happened, and you start wondering, don't you, about if they're fake and I'm doing what I'm doing because of them who are fake. I mean, it doesn't make me fake, but does that make what I'm researching fake? Is it then the equivalent of looking into a fairy tale, you know? Because the foundation is not sturdy. That's the debate with it. And so even though in the article, I had someone comment saying, and I will discuss a little bit here, just because I think it is relevant to discuss it a little. But they said, if you're going to discuss these charlatans, the Fox sisters, don't compare them to Cody and Story, who are two people. I've not looked into them, so it's unfair for me to judge them. So I'm just going to say what I know, which comes from Beardo, who has kind of debunked, but not quite. But yeah, they have been accused of similar things to the Fox sisters. They've denied it a lot for various reasons, and they've kind of been tested not quite properly as far as I'm aware. But it shows that these techniques are possibly still in use today. It's like Most Haunted, they commonly hear knocking occurring, and it has since been speculated perhaps that's because Carl is doing the toe tapping, as it were, within, like, in his shoes, and that's why the feet aren't on camera often, and that's why Carl's always around when the knocking's happening, etc. But again, it doesn't show that they are definitely fake or anything like that, but it leaves questions. And so if you trace it back, because like I said, I traced back the paranormal, I do what I do because I was kind of inspired by Most Haunted. Americans might do what they do because they were inspired by Ed and Lorraine Warren, Ghost Adventures. I'm also aware for the UK there's Ghost Watch as well, which occurred. But then tracing back from Most Haunted and Ed and Lorraine Warren, you then have the likes of the Fox sisters. You have undoubtedly other investigators, psychics, whoever, who will have inspired them and who will have discussed ghost stories, etc. And everyone's been inspired from someone. And if this all dates back to the spiritualism movement, and that's built on the Fox sisters, and they're shown to be fake, does the whole tower just collapse? That's what I was trying to say at the end, and that's always an interesting thing for me to debate. Because the more I look into the locations, the more I'm like, is this just a scam? Is it just a money scam? Are the investigators not real because they are after money? Are the locations only talking about hauntings because it gets them tourists? So it could very well just be a huge scam which everyone's been duped by, which is baffling to me. Because you'd think, as well, the thing that intrigues me about paranormal is there's no particular evidence for or against. I mean, there is evidence for it, but there's no definitive. It is real. It is not real. It is very in the middle. Sometimes it leans one way, sometimes it leans another way. It depends on what specifically you're looking at. But you would think if it was just a big scam that it would just be unveiled as this scam immediately. But it's not. It keeps going, which is odd. But yeah, I think that's all that I've got to say. I don't think there's anything else particular to add on to the Fox Sisters article. Like I said, in the future I may very well amend it. I know there's a couple of spelling mistakes in there which I need to adjust, but the full confession from Maggie Fox I will probably end up including at some point. For the full confession, please go to the Sci Encyclopedia. It is linked in that article. And if you want to read the full article, which I just read out, if you want to read more articles, etc., please go to thetrueparanormal.blogspot.com. It is the link in every single video I ever upload, aside from the live streams like this. So you'll need to go find some article snippets or article announcements or something like that. If you do want to read any articles, if you want the website. Or I'm sure you'll find it through bios and various things like that. So yeah, so I hope that you've enjoyed this live stream. I hope that you've enjoyed the article. I hope you've enjoyed today's article snippet as well, which was all about the Wendigo. One thing with the article snippets, which I will mention now, is I'm reading them and I'm thinking that they're quite vague. So in the articles I'm writing currently, I'm trying to be a bit more detailed in the opening paragraph or two, just to try and get the snippets a bit higher quality. So it will take time for you to notice that because I need to catch up with the snippets, but that's very much so the intention, to try and make them more detailed. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I hope that you all have a great evening, and I will see you next week when I live stream again. Cool, so goodbye.